Now that we know how to use the tools for coloring things, let's take a look at how we manage our colors themselves. We would do that over here in the color pane. If it's not already open, click on this triangle to open your palettes list. You can see for this scene, I have the regular default palette, and then I have a special one that contains the colors for this character. You can see my colors are named after this character, whose name is Red, and then what part of her that they're coloring. You'll see why you want to organize your color palettes this way in a second. So the basics of using a color is to select whatever color tool you're going to use. I'm going to use the paint bucket tool. Make sure you're on the drawing layer that you want to work with, and then you just select a color from the color palettes. Now the real power of the color palette becomes apparent when you want to change a color. So let's say we wanted to change the color of Red's hoodie. First I'm going to switch to OpenGL mode while we work. So if we want to change this color, we just choose that swatch from the palettes and pick a new color. You can see everywhere in the scene that color has been used, it gets updated. Whenever you're coloring on a vector layer, any color you use is going to be associated with a swatch somewhere in a palette. This means you need to be organized and think ahead about what colors you're going to use and how you want to sort them. So let's say we want to color Red's basket here. We would just come to the palettes and let's create a new palette. I'm just going to call this Basket. Now we're only going to have a couple colors in here. So let's start by clicking this button to add a color. Then let's click this to open it. We can give it a name. This is going to be the Basket Lines. And then let's pick a fairly dark brown. You actually have several different options for the style of your color picker. You might be seeing things in multi-wheel mode, but I prefer single wheel mode. You also have different options within here for which color wheel you want to look at. These ones here are probably more similar to ones you see in other programs. I like this version with the hue on the top bar and the value and saturation within the picker. So let's go find that dark brown that we wanted. That should work. Now, since I did this basket with vector lines, I'm just going to select them all and then choose this from the color palette. It's hard to tell since it's such a dark brown, but it did in fact color those. Now we need another color for our basket fill. And for that, we're going to pick a lighter brown. And then I'm just going to use the paint bucket tool and fill in all the shapes. Now let's say I wanted a different shade for some of these surfaces, like the top. I don't want to fully lock it off with hard lines, so what I'm going to do is come in here and use that stroke tool. First I'm going to hit K so we can see our vector lines. Then I'm just going to come here and draw some invisible strokes to divide up the surface. So now the top of this basket is a closed off shape that I can use the ink bucket tool on. But first I need a new color. I'm going to call it Basket Highlight. And then I'm going to pick a more golden brown for that. Then get my paint bucket tool, fill those in. Hit K again to turn off vector lines. And there we go. That looks pretty alright. Now I could do more and make it up out of even more colors, but this is good for the demonstration. Now there's more types of things that we can use in our color swatches. For example, on this thermos, I'm going to color it using a gradient. So first of all, I'm going to create a new palette, call it Thermos, and then I'm just going to call this Body. And now when I go to pick my color, I'm going to choose Gradient here. And I want it on linear. So this is the gradient picker here. If I choose one of these little arrows, this defines a color within the gradient. So if I change this to, let's go with something greenish. You can see now the gradient is going from this green color I just chose all the way to black. But I don't want it to go all the way to black. So I'm going to choose that, come back to my green area, and look for maybe a lighter green. But I don't want it to just go from dark to light. I want it to come back to dark. So I'm going to drag that here and then just click to add a third color to the gradient. Then I'm going to drag that down to a darker green. And let's say that that's good. So now if I use my bucket tool on this thermos, let me make sure I have the thermos layer selected. There, that actually filled it in just perfect. If you need to adjust a gradient, remember, in this group here, you have the Edit Gradient Texture tool. So this would let us manipulate the position and angle of this texture. But it's actually just the way we want it. Or maybe it should be this way. Cool, now we just need another one for the cap. I'm just going to make a few more colors and finish out this thermos. We can do other types of gradients too. Let's try to make this sun a little more authentic. First, let's make a color for it. We'll call it sun. Then let's go in there. Now we want a gradient, but in this case we want a radial gradient. That goes outward from the center towards the edge of your shape. So let's get some nice yellow oranges in there. But to make this look good, we want it to fade out at the edges. So if I add a third color to the gradient, I can use this slider to bring down the alpha value of that color. And you can see now it becomes invisible at the edge. Any color you define with a swatch can be given an alpha value to go along with it. So let's try that out on this sun and see how it works. I'll get the paint bucket tool, select my sun layer, and then hit that. Now, it doesn't look right because it's not positioned correctly. So again, let's use our Edit Gradient Texture tool, and we want to scale it down and recenter it. Whoops, and we've also made it more elliptical, so let's make it round again. And then center it within the shape we had defined and scale it down a little bit more. There, that looks a bit more like a sun. Next, I've got this short wall here that I want to finish up to show you the last kind of swatch you can make. I'm going to create a new palette called Wall. And then this time I'm going to use this button to add a texture. So now it's going to ask me to browse for a file on my computer. I have this texture picked out already. This is just a small image file that's going to be tiled to create a fill. So now, if I use the paint bucket tool, it uses that image as a fill. So here, if I come back to my Edit Gradient Texture tool, this is the image that I had defined, and I can scale this down to make it more appropriate. And there we go. So if you wanted to color your background or even your characters with a texture, that's how you would set that up, using the Add Texture option. That's the basics of using the color palette. In the next video, we'll go over some more advanced options that let you reuse the palettes you create in other scenes.